After the defeat of King Piccolo, Goku and Krillin both decided to train with new mentors until the next tournament. Goku is off training with Kami, and meanwhile Krillin trains with Fortune Teller Baba and her fighters. Goku trains with Kami in the original series, so we know how that goes. For now, we'll be focusing on Krillin and his training. Now, the first question is, what could she teach him? Obviously, Fortune Teller Baba isn't a martial artist, but she figured if this kid had trained with Roshi, then he was likely already quite skilled in that. He didn't have the best showing against Fang in a tournament, but he'd gotten much stronger since then. So, for physical training, she'd have him train with Bandages, Fang, See-Through, and Spike. He would have to take on all four of them at once and win. Spike was banned from using the Devilmite Beam, since this wasn't to the death. Initially, Krillin found these fights difficult. Against one or two of them he probably could have beaten them, but against all four of them he was struggling to keep up. See-Through was especially troublesome. Since he was invisible, Krillin couldn't see where the attacks were coming from, and with the others keeping his attention, he couldn't take a moment to find him. When Krillin wasn't sparring with those four, he was studying magic with Baba. She would teach him telekinesis as well as telepathy. She'd also give him a few books on more offensive magic, since she didn't know much herself. She had her fighters to defend her, she didn't need to know it. With the help of those books, Krillin was able to learn a spell that allowed him to absorb energy from his surroundings as well as people. He thought it fitting since he is a vampire. It was a spell that required focus, however, so it wouldn't be much use outside of a one-on-one. He found his ki took on a reddish tone. His energy wasn't particularly malicious, but it certainly looked menacing. One night, he'd noticed the moon back in the sky. He didn't know how to explain it, but it made him feel far more powerful. He'd see Fang and Spike just stood outside basking in the moonlight. "What are you doing?" "Absorbing the power of darkness," Spike answered as if he was supposed to know what that was. Krillin didn't really get it, but he did feel stronger out here.
"You became a vampire after the moon was destroyed, so you wouldn't know. We can absorb energy from the moonlight. You can then store it to use during the day. You'll be far stronger, but it's a temporary boost. You'll run out eventually."
Fang decided to clarify for him. "I'm not just making this up out of thin air, by the way. This is how demons work in another of Toriyama's stories, Sandland, which you should really check out. It has an anime and a game. I know vampires aren't technically demons, but according to the Supreme Kai in Daima, if it has pointy ears, it's probably a demon. So I think we can safely assume that vampires in Dragon Ball are of demonic origin. This means that Krillin is a demonic being and can use the power of darkness. As for Spike and Fang, Roshi destroyed the moon, so they were out of energy. That's why they couldn't do it in the tournament. I know this is kind of a stretch, but this is for Halloween, so I can play a little more fast and loose with the rules. Spike would explain to Krillin how to absorb the power from the moon. And he did just that. When he finally put it to use, it was the first time he managed to beat all four fighters at once. This was about a year into his training with Baba, which of course means Baba has to think of something more difficult for him to do.
"Finally beat them, I see,"
Baba remarked from the sidelines.
"Well, I don't have anyone else for you to train with, so how's this for a challenge? Defeat them all without getting hit once."
Now that was a challenge. In fact, this challenge would take Krillin the next 2 years to get through. According to Baba, by the time he was 19, he wasn't going to get much taller. This was nothing to do with him being a vampire, he was just never going to get that tall. A few months before the tournament was due to begin, Krillin was once again trying to beat all four fighters without getting hit. He really had to focus on how they move. He felt the wind against the back of his head, and just in time he'd move his head to the side, evading a punch from See-Through, before grabbing his hand and throwing him off the stage. So he was eliminated. He didn't have time to celebrate though, as he had to roll out of the way as Bandages tried to ensnare him. He'd jump upwards, aiming to kick Bandages, when out of the corner of his eye he'd see Spike tossing his pitchfork towards him, so he turned into a bat, safely evading it. He'd land behind Bandages, hitting him in the back of the neck, knocking him out. Fang and Spike both rushed him at once. These two could also use the power of darkness, so they were a little more dangerous. Still, it was temporary, and without it, Fang was the weakest of the fighters. He'd evade a punch from Fang, and then hit him in the stomach, knocking him down. For Spike though, Krillin would have to tap into the energy from the moon he'd absorbed. Krillin was far stronger, and with one solid punch to the face, he rendered the Devilman unconscious.
"Oh my, you did it!"
Baba sounded genuinely surprised. Krillin had been improving at a rapid rate, but honestly, she thought this goal was impossible.
"Well, I'm not really sure what else I can teach you. You've already taught me more than enough."
He was definitely stronger than King Piccolo had been, stronger than Goku had been as well, though he supposed he'd have to see how strong Goku had gotten at the tournament. Until then, he'd spend time practicing, refining what he already knew until the day came.
"I'm headed out now, Baba. Thank you for everything. I could just tell you if you'll win now and save you the time."
Baba gestured towards her crystal ball.
"No, I'd rather just go."
If she told him he'd lose, that'd be pretty demoralizing, and if she told him he'd win, then he'd be overconfident and probably wind up losing anyway. So he'd head out, with Baba saying she'd watch him from here on her crystal ball. He would arrive first, meeting up with Bulma and her group. Then Goku would arrive, and it took them a moment to recognize him. Until Goku saw Bulma wearing lipstick and asked if she was bleeding, which pretty much convinced that it was him. Tien, Yamcha, and Chaozu would arrive next, and after Goku explained what had happened to his tail, they'd head inside. He'd have a brief encounter with Piccolo Jr., as well as Chi-Chi, who was furious Goku didn't recognize her. Goku, Tien, and Chaozu all agree not to tell anyone else that Piccolo Jr. was competing in the tournament. Nothing changes for now, so we'll just give a quick recap of the next few matches. Everyone gets to their preliminaries, aside from Yajirobe, who was beaten by Kami disguised as Hero. Chaozu also loses in the preliminaries to Mercenary Tao. In round 1, Tien beats Mercenary Tao fairly easily, and in the next match, Goku is up against Chi-Chi. He wins, and since a promise is a promise, he agrees to marry her. I know the dub tried to make it more romantic, but in the sub it's literally, well, I guess I did promise, so do you want to get married? He still didn't really know what marriage was. Krillin just told him it meant they had to live together in the same house. After this, we have Krillin vs Piccolo. In the original, this is a short but interesting fight. Krillin does better than Piccolo expected, but Piccolo was never in any danger of losing. Here though, Krillin is much stronger. Piccolo starts the fight underestimating him, only to be struck in the cheek by a punch from the shorter fighter. He stumbled to the side, almost losing his footing, holding the spot where he'd been hit. That had actually hurt. But he didn't think to remove his weighted clothing yet. He'd run forward and attempt to kick Krillin, who'd avoid the attack. Piccolo would try a few more blows, and the monk managed to block each one. Krillin jumped backwards before outstretching his hands, casting the spell he'd learned from training with Baba. Piccolo was enveloped by red energy, and he found it increasingly difficult to move. Krillin was draining his energy. He had to think a way out of this fast. He'd break Krillin's focus by firing a beam from his mouth, hitting him in the shoulder. Krillin did heal faster than most, but this would still take an hour or two. You've got some interesting techniques. Piccolo decided to throw off his turban and cloak, finally taking Krillin seriously. This also panics the crowd, and most of them flee because they think he's Demon King Piccolo. I'll start fighting for real now. Without those weighing him down, Piccolo was much faster, and he was on Krillin in an instant, kicking him into the air before flying after him and sending him back to the ground with an elbow. Just as one last touch, he'd fire an energy beam after him, destroying some of the arena. He'd land on the other side of the ring. That should have done it. The announcer began to count, but Krillin was back on his feet by the count of 3. His clothes were ripped apart and he was covered in bruises, but he looked ready to fight. Krillin lunged forward, his aura taking on a reddish-pink hue, fueled by the energy absorbed from the moonlight. His power surpassed that of Goku or Piccolo. The Namekian was powerless against him as Krillin landed blow after blow on him. Piccolo would take off upwards, trying to gain some distance, but Krillin would fire a homing energy wave after him, which too took on a different shade while he was in this state. Piccolo tried his best to block the attack, and while it helped somewhat, he still took considerable damage. Krillin's reserves of energy ran dry, and he reverted to his original state, absolutely exhausted. Piccolo fell to the tournament stage, and the announcer began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. No movement. Krillin relaxed a little. 5, 6, 7, 8. Krillin's hopes were dashed as Piccolo made it to his feet. That was close. If I hadn't blocked it, you'd probably have won. Krillin would once again get ready to fight, but he was running on empty. Piccolo lunged forward at Krillin, grabbing him by what was left of his collar and punching him repeatedly in the face. Krillin didn't even have the energy left to defend himself as Piccolo lifted him into the air before slamming him into the ground face first, running his face into the stonework of the arena before throwing him from the stage. Krillin really made him work for it, but he'd won. Though, if Krillin could do that, he could be a problem later. He'd have to kill him after he'd killed Goku. The rest of the tournament proceeds as usual. Hero beats Yamcha, Goku beats Tien, and Piccolo traps Kami in a bottle, who abandoned Hero's body so he wouldn't be trapped too. So the final round is Piccolo vs Goku. Nothing really changes, although towards the end of the fight when they're discussing what they're going to do if Piccolo beats Goku, Piccolo is a little less confident. Krillin might not be able to do that power of darkness thing again, but even without it, Krillin, Tien, Yamcha, and Kami could give him trouble, if they all ganged up on him. He wouldn't have to worry about that though, as like in the original, Goku defeats Piccolo. He, of course, stops Kami from killing Piccolo and even gives him a senzu bean, so Piccolo leaves. Though, this time he considers both Goku and Krillin his rivals. He also wanted to look into this power of darkness thing Krillin did. If it's a demonic ability, then he should be able to do it as well. Goku and Chi-Chi get married, and afterwards they all go their separate ways for a few years. Krillin considered training at Baba's place once again, but she told him not to bother.
You're welcome to if you want to, but I think you'd learn more just traveling around the world.
And so Krillin would do just that. He'd stay in contact with his friends, of course, but he'd travel the globe, drifting from place to place, helping out and learning along the way. And that's where we're going to leave things for now. How will Krillin affect the story as we head into Z? With 3 of them here, they should have an easier time against Raditz at the very least. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. I always enjoy reading them. Or just say hi. Or comment your suggestions for other what-if scenarios. I always at least consider them. Subscribe if you want, but that's up to you. Anyway, that's all from me. Take care.